You might have seen on television, if you watch television, there's a commercial that has that little pink bunny that's beating a drum. Anybody ever seen that? So the gentleman's going to come and share his story with you. Reminds me of that pink bunny. Steve Stanley has just got an amazing energy. He's always going, and he's responsible for a lot of the maintenance and that sort of thing around our church family. I've come to love Steve and Jenny as they become a part of our family. Steve's going to come and share his story. It's an amazing story. Every story is how God has won us and called us. So Steve, come on up. Thank you for sharing with us today.
Thanks. I always wondered about, because I'm short, if this is going to be okay. Can you hear me? I feel like I'm up like this. What? Oh, thanks. I don't usually stand still, so it's really tough to have a microphone right in front of me. Anyhow, I love that song, that last one. It says, our God is higher, our God is, whatever the word it was. What the other one was is that for 17 years I taught the cults and stuff like that, how we can see our God as higher than any other God that anybody else has to offer in our world. So it's really neat to be able to sing these songs and know that our God is higher than any other supposed God in the world. So anyhow, I'll start out. I really have a hard time following notes because Brent wanted me to write everything down. I said, I don't do things like that, but I'm going to try real hard to follow my notes today. Okay, so I was born, here I am, a long time ago in Brainerd, Minnesota. And I was the last of 4 children, 2 sisters. I had a brother. One of my sisters died at 50 of brain cancer. It was a tragedy in our family. We've been through a lot of stuff in our family over the years. But when we were when I was 5 years old, by the way, does anybody know what Brainerd, Minnesota is famous for? Huh? Anybody heard of Paul Bunyan before? Well, in Brainerd, Minnesota, there's this huge statue that's like 25, 30 feet tall, and it gets up, and it'll stand and it'll talk to you like you're there, and like they know you can go in and tell them to say something about somebody. But Paul Bunyan is where Brainerd, Minnesota is, and it's still there today, and so that's what they're famous for. Okay, so when I was 5 years old, my parents decided my mom had really terrible arthritis. And so that Minnesota was not for her. And so we moved to California, moved to Anaheim, California. And it was a 4-day journey. Now, Minnesota to California isn't normally a 4-day journey in our world of freeways and expressways and stuff like that. But in 51, that'd be 1951, it took a long time. The roads were only 2 lanes. It took a long time to get there. And as Brent said about the Energizer, but that's not the first time I've been called that. But I was born with energy. And this is a quote from my mother's diary on about the 3rd day as we were coming. By the way, it's exactly 68 years today that we moved from Minnesota to California. Kind of interesting, I thought. Anyhow, so this is a quote from my mother about me. She called me Stevie. Stevie's pep gets the best of us sometimes. Too close at quarters for all day with such a dynamo. And so that's kind of my life. That's kind of who I am. I've built that way. God made me that way. A lot of things I'm going to refer to today is that I don't have any credit for anything. God made me who I am, and that's who I am. And I accept that as best I can. Okay, so when we got to Anaheim, California, we moved several times in the first year, and then we settled in a house that I actually lived in off and on until I was 26 and married Jenny. So that was the long time we lived there. Does anybody know, I already said this about Brainerd, but does anybody here know what Anaheim, California is famous for? Disneyland, yes. Well, Disneyland was a huge part of my life. Because on July 17th, 1955, you know me, I was one of the people that went across Fantasyland Bridge to open up Disneyland officially. So there was about 100 kids that they took from the community. Back then, Anaheim was a pretty small town. And it isn't anymore, but it was then. And so they picked elementary schools, and they just picked us up, and we got to run across. The drawbridge went down, and we ran across it. It was the official opening of Disneyland. So anyhow, that was my claim to fame. Also, do you know how much it cost? If you wanted to just go into Disneyland and walk around and do nothing, you know how much it cost in 1960 to get into Disneyland? $1. Now you multiply it by what, 1,000 now? It's $120 to get in there now to get the whole thing. So anyhow, my family, when I was young, were always churchgoers. To this day, I honestly don't know if my parents were even Christians. I really don't know. I know we went to church every Sunday, and I know it was done. They tithed a lot of money to the church. In fact, the IRS audited them a couple times. They gave so much money to the church, so we were involved in the church a lot. And it was an EUB church, Evangelical United Brethren Church. They merged with the Methodists, so you get an idea where we're coming from here. They merged with Methodists when I was 19, and there's only one state in the union that has EUB churches left in it, and that's Oregon. There's one right on Sunnyside Road, an EUB church. So they're still around, but they're not very evangelical in their outlook. So we were always there. We went every Sunday to church all the time. When I became older, became a teenager, I went to every service I could do. We had choir, we had youth group. I was there all the time. I loved it, but I wasn't a believer. In fact, I used to go around and tell my friends about the Lord, and not even understanding who He was myself. I had not asked Jesus into my heart. That was just kind of I'm thinking of Ed when I say that. But I did not ask God into my life at that point. But I loved church, and this particular denomination wasn't really big on the salvation message. But when I was 12 years old, this is the weirdest thing. My wife and I have talked about this many times. When I was 12 years old, I would lay in bed at nighttime and make up sermons. And I would just lay there, and I'd get sweaty. I'd be passionate and full of all this salvation message and stuff like that. It was really amazing to me. And I loved being like that. But I still didn't know who God was. But yet I still had this thing that came into me that wasn't the Spirit of the Lord yet, because I wasn't even a believer. But it was really an interesting thing. Looking back, the Bible and the gospel were a big part of my soul. It's always been part of who I am. And even though I wasn't a believer, I see now that you can get God. I'm old now, so I can look back and see God has a purpose for all things in our life. I got a grandson in the hospital right now in Randall who's got some blood disease that we don't even know about. But we don't know if he's okay, but he's been in the hospital like 3 or 4 days. And so you never know what God brings, but He always has a plan, okay? And He has purpose for us. And you younger people here, I see these kids over here, they all come every Sunday. You guys. and I think you've got so much life to live yet, but you still have to realize that God can direct you in this way. God has a plan for us. There's no doubt in my mind. My soul, who I was, He made me who I was. I tell my friends in the neighborhood, I had one friend named Greg Fisher, who was a blasphemous young man. He was really a nasty kid. His family was just a mess. And I remember walking down the street of my house and looking at him and says, Greg, God can save you if you want Him to. And he goes, no, I'm too bad. God cannot do that. And I says, yes, He can. But that's the only part of the conversation I remember. And again, I wasn't even a Christian at the time. Okay, but He had a plan for me. So at that same time I was doing these sermons in bed, I was having some issues, physical, emotional, and psychological issues that were going on in my mind that I didn't quite understand. I was unable to cope with this. My parents knew nothing about it, and I was kind of suicidal at the time. I really was. I didn't know what to do with myself. This is kind of funny, but girls would come by and say, hi, Steve. And they'd wink at me and things like that. And this was unsettling to me. I had no idea what was going on in my life, that somebody would be attracted to me, okay? I was going through this roller coaster of feelings and not understanding any of them. Of course, years later, I understood that, this is just part of growing up and having people notice you and you noticing them. The feelings that were emotions that were part of my puberty, or puberty, however you want to pronounce that, Anyhow, and so, but the funny thing was, not funny, but the weird thing was I was lost. I was completely beside myself. I didn't know what to do with me. I was doing these sermons at night, but then I'd have these feelings. To this day, if a train goes by my house, well, there's no train by my house, but if a train went by my house, I would remember those nights that the train would go by and whistle a horn. It still brings back memories of that. The great thing was I had a teacher in 8th grade who was a Christian, and I found this out later, but he was a Christian, and he saw that I was distressed. And he put me, I remember him putting his arm around my shoulder and says, "You're okay, Steve, you're okay, God will take care of you," that kind of thing. And he really saved my life. And to this day, I'm very grateful to Mr. Small was his name. And a lost soul at 12 or 13 years old, and a teacher came and put his arm around me. I was a teacher for 17 years, and one of the things I loved was the fact that I could talk to kids and talk to them about what was going on in their life. That's kind of who I wanted to be and where I was going to go. Am going, I guess. So that summer, after that talk with Mr. Small and him taking care of me and helping me, I went to a camp that I'd gone to many times in my life. And this was the first year, and I went forward. There was an actual speaker there, ex-pro football player, was the bishop of our church, and he brought a sermon up. I don't even know what he said, but what I said, I knew I needed to have a relationship with Jesus, and so I went forward. And my life really changed at that point. It really made a difference to me. The word Savior from that time on has always been a big thing for me, that God can actually save us from our own self in our lives and things going on. He's always got a plan, okay? So skipping ahead to 18 years old, I met an old friend in junior college, Fullerton JC in Fullerton, California. And I met him there, and we hadn't seen each other in 10 years. And so I said to him, where do you go to church? And he says, well, I go to a Baptist church in Anaheim. And I said, oh, well, I'm going to go to that church. And so I went there, and I have to say this the right way. I was not very biblically oriented where I came from. It was an amazing experience, believe it or not, to hear the scriptures actually taught. The word of God actually spoken. And so it was just another change in my life. I just gobbled that stuff up. And so I was 18, and I become saved when I was 14. And I wasn't really that mature at this point, but I went on and I said, these kids at my junior high, the junior high kids at my old church need to hear this. So in the nighttime, I would go and teach the junior hires about the Bible, and because I felt so like I needed to do that, because I learned the stuff I needed to do it. Okay, I felt really a burden to share with other people what God had showed me. So I have this written down right here. It says, "Do it slowly," because I talk fast. I was really not really mature in my faith, but my faith had always been steadfast. It's an important point. I was really not mature in my faith, but my faith had always been steadfast. I never lost faith in God. I just wasn't mature enough to understand where I was coming from. Okay, God was sending me out without full knowledge of His grace, and I was really grateful to Him. I was doing His will, even though I didn't necessarily know I was doing His will. I was just following what He was showing me to do. And looking back, and I was saying so many times, He led and I followed, not knowing His will, but doing what was right as far as I knew. See, Christianity isn't hard. It's just what you know, share it, and let God lead you where He goes. A lot of people have problems with the will of God. The will of God is what you do. You get up in the morning and you do it. That's, you can ask Him for it, but you got to move forward and go on. I was being directed by God, living my life in obedience the best I could at that point, and I was just really happy with that. So this next area of my life is kind of a skip forward to 22. I'm trying to go fast here. 22, and I got I was mowing my lawn in the front of my house, like I did thousands of times. And the mailman, who knew everybody in the neighborhood, and I knew who he was, and he came up to me and he handed me this bunch of mail and says, sorry, man. He says, about that. And I went, what is he talking about? And so I opened up the mail, looked at Brent, and said, oh, welcome. Greetings from Uncle Sam. You know, I got drafted. That was funny, huh? Greetings from Uncle Sam. And see, I was in college at the time, and you had to take 12 units in order to be a full-time student and get a deferment. So, but my life wasn't that easy. I was working full-time, and every girl I saw just about I fell in love with, so I was an emotional wreck. And besides that, I was just stupid, you know, just dumb, because everything was influencing my life, and it got me sent to the war. What's interesting is that I remember standing there on my front lawn and saying, I'm willing to go. This country has been so good to me in what I have, and I lived through the 50s after the First War, Second World War, and it was just a wonderful time to live. Those of you older know that the 50s were a great time, you know, and I was so glad that God had allowed me to be there, and this draft notice was obviously God's will, and so without hesitation, I just accepted. I just went and said, okay. It even surprised me to say, you know, because you got to remember in this time, in this age, in 1967, 68, if those of you have read history or lived history, you know what was going on in the United States at that time. Everybody was talking about going to Canada or skipping the draft or, you know, finding some kind of thing wrong with them, and so they could not be out. But that was every day when I sat on a wall at Fullerton Junior College with all my friends, that's all we talked about, was whether you're going to get drafted or not. So here I was, I got drafted, I accepted it, and it was obviously God's will. In 1968, I checked into Fort Ord, California, and went through basic training in AIT and went to NCO school and stuff like that, and got all the promotions I needed until I got to Vietnam. November 27, 1969, I flew in on an airplane, World Airlines. Yes, there was an airline that flew us in. I expected jets following the things, you know, following us into Vietnam. You know, there's a big war going on there. I expected these, you know, and to get in there, it's a regular airport, you know, and you fly in a World Airlines, and you get out, and it's an amazing experience, but I was really, really scared. You have to realize that war isn't exactly a fun thing. There's too much for me to tell you about this at this point, so if you want to talk to me about it, you know, let me know and I'll talk to you about it, okay? Because it's important. I don't have a lot of time here today to do that. So in January 69, right after I got there, I volunteered to go into a recon platoon in 101st Airborne. I was 101st Airborne. And I went into a recon platoon and volunteered for it because it just seemed safer from what I looked at. I was going to get put into a company that had a commanding officer that was getting guys killed all the time, so I wanted to get into something else. So I got into recon, and there was about 40 people in our platoon. Now, recons are stealthy people. We go out and kind of do stealthy stuff. But soon after the 40, the guys leaving and guys getting injured and stuff like that dwindled down to 25 people in my platoon. So I became the radio guy for the first squad of recon, and we carried, and this is not a joke, not telling you that, we carried 90 pounds on our back, and I was a radio guy, so I had to carry extra weight because I had to carry these batteries like this big, you know, huge. They weighed like 3 pounds apiece. And so we had 90-pound packs in 5,000-foot mountains. Yeah, most people think Vietnam was all flat land. It's not. Where I was, it was all mountains, just like you'd see the Cascades here, just not as tall. It was 100 degrees every day or so. You either sweating during that time or being blasted by rain. It didn't make any difference. 24/7, you were miserable. Okay? I never had enough water. I got lots of stories to tell about that, but I won't. Never had enough water, and so we would dip our canteens into the rice paddies that were fertilized by water buffalo, and we ended up with dysentery. And many of us had dysentery, and the thing is about being out there is that you don't have a lot of time to go to the latrine. You just kind of do what you got to do and keep moving, because they aren't going to wait for you. They just go, you know, and you just go and things move on, in a pun sort of thing. So anyhow, it was not a good combo. 5,000-foot mountains, 90-pound packs, no water. It was a miserable time, very miserable. Thank God I had a Bible. I had you've seen these little New Testaments and Psalms and Proverbs, and I was constantly reading Psalms because David's Psalms that we're going through here. David's Psalms he's a man fighting a war. Most of the time he's writing these scriptures. So anyhow, I give David a lot of credit in what he wrote through God's will, saved me in Vietnam because I had a chance to read his word whenever we had some time down. They called me a preacher because I read my Bible. I didn't do a lot of preaching because there wasn't a lot of time, but they called me that anyhow. Okay, so one night after, this is miserable stuff. One night after sleeping all night, now you have pulled guard duty at night, a couple hours a night, everything. But this night, pouring rain, which happened a lot. But I was laying wrapped in my poncho in 6 inches of water. Just laying there, sleeping, believe it or not. Completely out. Just gone. Got up, and it was just that's a terrible night. And I remember this specifically because the next morning we got up, and the sun was out. It was just beautiful. And it wasn't really hot at that time of the morning. You don't get up at like 8 every morning. You get up when the sun comes up and what everybody tells you to. And so we got up, we actually got to have these little tablets, and we got to heat up food. I remember having hot chocolate. We had actual hot food. Now, most of the time we ate stuff out of cans from World War II that were marked World War II on them 1945 sea rations, and we'd dip in there, and then we never got a chance to heat it up. Have you ever eaten one of those things that are, what are they called? You pour water in them and they rehydrate? Because we didn't have any water, so we'd only pour half the water in those things. We called them LRPs. Long-range reconnaissance platoon things. They were very light, but we'd eat like chili and stuff like that, but only half hydrated. And so, it was just awful. But when you got a chance to heat up your water and you had water, it was wonderful. So we got to do that, and I was really happy about that. But then we started going out, and the fear just kept coming back. You got to understand that you're always afraid you're going to die. That's just how it is. You're always afraid you're going to die. And you never know when something's going to hit this way, that way. And I remember getting out on a trail that day. It was a really wide trail, and we were in the Ashaw Valley, which, if anybody's a history student and knows about the Ashaw Valley, in 1969, you'll know that was the very worst place in Vietnam to be, the valley and the mountains above it. So we were in this valley, a very wide valley with B-52 bomb craters, as far as you could see going both ways. 500-pound bombs had gone off there, weeks before. I don't know how long. But it was a very scary thing to do. And I remember being really, really afraid that day. I hadn't slept much that night, and even though we had food, it was okay. We were walking out there, and all of a sudden, this is how God works. This is the thing you got to remember about God. He said, all of a sudden, Psalm 23 came to my mind. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. And immediately, I was completely happy. God had actually changed my heart in a millisecond based on his word. And so I learned from that the word of God is important to learn, understand, and know. It was just a miracle to me, and it's no joke. It really did happen like that. God always there for you or with you. This is kind of what I'm saying to you. I'm talking to you guys now. It's this, God is always there with you whatever your situation. You can attest to that. I can attest that in so many ways in my life. We must trust and believe that he knows the best route for our lives. We may not like it. We may not think it's good, but he knows the best way. And I can tell you that because I'm old. I've been through it all. I still got more to do, but I'm old. Okay? So after I got done with Vietnam, I got out 1 year to the day. I came in November 27th, 68. Got back, started to go back home in November 69 on November 27th. I remember that real well. When I returned home, I went back to Cal State Fullerton, where I was a second-year junior when I left. And this was September 1970. While in line for register, my wife doesn't know I'm going to say this, but in the line for registration, you got a picture of this. There's a whole line there, and her name was V, Vaughn, and my name was S. And so she had to get in this line and get in, and she was walking around with this little mini skirt on. And it was the 70s, and she walks up, and I look at this guy behind me, and I go, man, she's a good-looking woman. But not quite that way, but good-looking young lady. And he goes, yeah. And so all of a sudden she turns around, she comes walking toward me, and I'm going, whoa. And I was dating a girl at the time, and she was dating a guy, but she was still, worthwhile looking at. She comes up to me, she goes, can I cut in? And what do you think I said? No, you go with somebody else. No, I let her in. And from that time on, we got to know each other, and we eventually got married. And so it's been 48 years since I met her. 48 years, yeah. Now, she used to have brown hair. Now she has blonde hair, but it looks, that's the way things are. So we got married in 1972. And after a few years, we had a daughter born to us in 74, one in 76, one in 79, and one in 83. And I said, that's a quiverful. And my wife said, no, it's not. 5 is a quiverful. I don't know. What is a quiverful, Brent? 4's fine. Okay, good. So I felt I had a quiverful. We actually did a lot of, my wife and I and the kids brought people into our house to stay with us when they were having difficulty in their home. We had a boy for 5 years that we took care of. And then he finally went back to his family. But we did a lot of stuff like that. So quiverful kind of thing. I'm astonished at how God has blessed me with my wife and her girls. Now, I was here about 2 years ago on Father's Day and talked about what it would be to be a father. We stood up here, 3 or 4 of us guys. Tim was there. Where's Tim? See, Tim was up here with me. And back then I said I had 16 grandkids. But I don't anymore. I have 20. We have our daughter we have a daughter who can have children. She adopted 4 children. And then at 39, she got pregnant with her only child, so she's now 22 weeks along. It's going to be very kind of fun to see this. We were praying for a girl. She found out last week it's a boy. Yeah, that's the way it is. So I have 20 grandkids, and they're a handful, having all that stuff, all those people around. It's really fun to just sit and watch as a grandpa now, to look at this and see all the kids and see them playing with each other. It's just wonderful to see. God has allowed all this stuff to happen in my life. It's nothing I did by myself. I had nothing to do, some to do with it, but not much, really. It must be said that during these years, I was continuing. It's a weird thing. When I was in my 20s, I was praying for my children. I wasn't even married yet. I was praying for my children. I was praying for my grandchildren. And I didn't even know who they were. Didn't know what they were going to be. Didn't know who my kids were even going to marry. Didn't even know I had kids, how many kids I was going to have. But I was praying for that because it was part of my soul. It's part of what God made me. And so I can tell you now and attest to you that the prayer really is valuable in your life, because you never know how God's going to answer these things. And I got answered with 4 daughters and 20 grandchildren. And I still today pray for my grandchildren's husbands and wives, because I think that we need to be doing that. It was just something that came to my mind, okay? In 73, Ginny and I decided to go back to school, went to Multnomah School of the Bible, and back then their motto was, if you want Bible, you want Multnomah. I think that was right. I think that's what it was. And so we went there and went to a grad class, people with 3 master's level class. I took 1 year there. It was great. It was what I needed. I had been working for Youth for Christ the year before, and I realized I needed Bible badly. So it was nice to have that. Same year, Ginny and I went to the Firs in Bellingham, Washington, and worked there, and I taught the Bible. I taught James to a bunch of conference kids that would come in, and I taught a thing on James, and I taught a thing on something else. I can't remember what it was. But I did that, and while I was there, while I was going through and studying for this James thing, I came across a book by a name, I meant to bring the book with me, a man written in 1960 by E.M. Bounds. You know, you've never heard of this man, I'm sure. And he had a book, you have? Very good. And it's called The Power Through Prayer. Absolutely changed my life. I recommend the book. Anybody has a prayer ministry or anything like that, I recommend this book to you. It's not very big. It had a huge influence on me and added to my walk as a prayer person. And so it's really good. While Ginny and I were going to college, we weren't married yet, I heard about this guy named R.B. Thiem. Some people don't like the man, but he wrote a book called The Faith Rest Life. Absolutely astounding. It changed me totally. It really cemented my faith. Basically, the theme of the book is you need to rest in God, and you just have faith in God. And there's more to it, way more to it than that. But it was really something that grabbed me and said, okay, this is something that allowed me to go forward. The rest, here's basically the book is about. We can rest in all God allows to happen in our lives. Again, that's kind of a theme I've been saying all along here. Okay, but we can rest in what God has in our lives. I know a lot of people here, and I know things are going on in your life, and you can rest in that, not understanding it, but just knowing it. Okay? 10 years later, we were attending a church in Issaquah, Washington. We moved a lot. I didn't tell you this first. My wife and I, the first 5 years we were married, we moved 14 times. So it was a lot of moving and shuffling and stuff. We had kids during that time too. It was really a mess. But we had lived in Issaquah for a while, for about 5.5 years outside in North Bend, and went to a church in Issaquah. And this man who was the pastor there had gone to Multnomah at the same time I had, but I didn't know him. He'd taken the 4-year course, and he was a fan of a man named Major Ian Thomas, who put together a group called the Torchbearers, which is still out there today. And the Major's been gone for a long time, but he actually came and spoke at our church. And he had a book called If I Perish, I Perish. And it's a story about the book of Esther. And Esther is a great little book in the Old Testament. And it answers the question that we should ask ourselves today. We should ask ourselves today, is it worthwhile to put your life on the line to save people? Is it worthwhile to put your life on the line to save people? Not just save them physically, and there's a lot of wars going on in our world, but this is about salvation. Is it worth it to put your life on the line? These times are coming in the world. We're seeing things breaking down. They could get better, but you have to make a choice right now. It's like a lot of other things. You make a choice right now to say, am I worth putting my life on the line for Jesus? Because it could. You younger people, this can actually happen to you. You know, I'm old. I've seen a lot of things happening, okay? So, to end, my wife and I have been through many tough times in our 46 years of marriage. We have been in very lean times. We have been with no money at all and stuff like that. We've been through sad times, people dying, my parents, my sisters, things like her mom died at 46 with cancer. We had disagreeing times in 46 years of marriage and times that just crushed us to the core. Yet, you can't be married that long without that. But through all these times, God has blessed us beyond what we could think or imagine. And that's the truth. I've told this to other people. It's amazing to me how God has allowed us to be blessed. It shouldn't have happened that way. In fact, by man's estimation, we could not be where we are today in all areas of our life. But man is not in charge, thank goodness. God is in charge, and God is the one who we can. God is all we can say is to praise Him. And I left one little thing here that just one of the things that's come to me in my life is that I know my Redeemer lives. It's a song, but you need to keep that in your mind. I know my Redeemer lives. So thanks.